Welcome to another episode of Spotlight Murder. I'm your host, Kieran Caldwell, and today we're diving deep into one of Britain's most perplexing unsolved murders, the shocking death of beloved BBC presenter Jill Dando. This case has everything: a cherished television personality gunned down in broad daylight, a controversial conviction that divided a nation, and conspiracy theories that span from obsessive fans to international assassination plots. Over the next hour, we'll unravel the events of April 26, 1999, explore the flawed investigation that followed, and examine why this case continues to haunt British consciousness more than 2 decades later. Let me paint you a picture of Jill Dando in 1999. She was Britain's sweetheart, warm, photogenic, and trusted by millions of viewers who welcomed her into their homes every week. Known for her congenial and trustworthy demeanor, Jill had become synonymous with quality BBC programming. She was the face of Crime Watch, that groundbreaking show that helped solve countless criminal cases by appealing directly to the public for information. But Jill wasn't just a crime-fighting television presenter. She was a humanitarian who used her platform for good. Just 20 days before her death, she had made a prominent appeal for Kosovan Albanian refugees fleeing the brutal conflict with Serbia. Her compassion and dedication to helping others would later become central to understanding potential motives for her murder. In 1997, she was voted BBC Personality of the Year, a testament to her popularity and the trust the British public placed in her. She seemed to have it all: a successful career, public adoration, and personal happiness. She had recently become engaged to Alan Farthing, a surgeon, and her future looked bright and promising. What makes this case so particularly haunting is that Jill represented safety and justice on television. She was the person who helped catch the bad guys, who brought closure to victims' families. The cruel irony that she would become a victim herself, with her own case becoming one of Britain's most notorious unsolved murders, adds a tragic dimension that still resonates today. The morning of April 26, 1999, started like any other for Jill Dando. She had spent the night at her fiancé Alan Farthing's house in nearby Chiswick, and at 10 a.m., she left to return to her own home on Gowan Avenue in Fulham, southwest London. By 10:30 a.m., a cleaner working in the area noticed a man loitering outside Jill's house, a detail that would later prove crucial to understanding the timeline of events. At approximately 11:30 a.m., as Jill approached her front door, keys in hand, her life was brutally cut short. A neighbor was startled by what seemed like a cry or scream emanating from just outside her house. This wasn't a random attack or a botched robbery. The precision was chilling. As Jill attempted to unlock her front door, her assailant ambushed her from behind with military-like efficiency. The killer forced her to the ground and executed her at point-blank range with a 9mm automatic handgun. This wasn't the work of an amateur. It was calculated, professional, and terrifyingly precise. Within minutes of the attack, the same neighbor who heard the scream observed a tall, white male, about 6 feet in height, casually walking away from the vicinity. The killer's composure was unnerving. No panic, no running, just a calm, measured departure that suggested this was someone accustomed to violence. Jill's lifeless body was discovered by another neighbor less than 15 minutes later. The timeline that followed reads like a thriller novel. Witnesses described a man running away who then crouched near Bishop's Park, speaking on a cell phone. Around 11:45 a.m., a man matching a police description was seen boarding a bus. At 11:52 a.m., a blue Range Rover drove quickly down Fulham Palace Road. By 1:03 p.m., Jill Dando was pronounced dead at the hospital. The professional nature of this assassination cannot be overstated. No forensic evidence was left behind. The assailant had managed to remain completely concealed in Jill's small garden area, evading detection by any witnesses until the moment of attack. Most remarkably, CCTV footage that recorded Jill's journey from her fiancé's house to her own ruled out the possibility that she had been followed, suggesting the killer knew her routine and was lying in wait. The murder of Jill Dando sent shockwaves through Britain. This wasn't just any murder. This was an attack on someone who represented safety, justice, and the very fabric of British broadcasting. The pressure on police to solve the case was immense, and what followed was one of the most extensive investigations in British criminal history. During the initial 6 months, authorities conducted interviews with over 2,500 individuals and recorded around 1,000 official statements. The investigation commanded more public funding and a larger police force than any similar case in recent memory. A £250,000 reward was offered for information leading to the killer's capture, a sum that would later raise questions about whether such a substantial reward might have compromised the reliability of evidence. Detective Chief Inspector Hamish Campbell, who spearheaded the investigation, declared that all theories would be thoroughly explored. But here's where the story takes a troubling turn. Reports released years later revealed a shocking lapse. Over 100 potential suspects were never identified or questioned by police. Among these untraced individuals were suspected members of the Serbian Secret Service, the IRA, and a notorious British gangster residing in Spain. The police reportedly failed to identify 11 men who were seen in Jill's street on the day of her murder. Despite this massive manhunt, law enforcement faced a daunting reality. They had no clear motive and no obvious suspects. The professional nature of the hit suggested someone with military or intelligence training, yet the investigation seemed to drift without direction. It wasn't until more than a year later, in May 2000, that police attention would shift to a local man living near Jill's home, a decision that would prove to be one of the most controversial aspects of this entire case. When a beloved public figure is murdered in such mysterious circumstances, conspiracy theories are inevitable. The Jill Dando case spawned more than most, each theory reflecting different aspects of her public and private life that might have made her a target. The first theory centered on the possibility of an obsessive fan. As a high-profile media personality, Jill was exposed to certain risks similar to other celebrities like John Lennon, who was murdered by a deranged fan. Her friendly demeanor and popularity made her seem approachable, and it was conceivable that someone with a distorted sense of attachment could have developed dangerous intentions. But the fan theory couldn't explain the professional nature of the killing. This leads us to the second major theory: revenge by criminal elements. Jill's role as co-host of Crime Watch placed her in a prominent position in the fight against crime. She frequently issued appeals and was involved in recreating serious crime scenes. Her efforts may have led to the apprehension of violent offenders, possibly marking her as a target for retribution. The precision of her murder certainly suggested someone with the resources and skills of organized crime. Then there's the Serbian connection, perhaps the most intriguing theory of all. Prior to her death, Jill had participated in that BBC appeal for Kosovan Albanian refugees fleeing the conflict with Serbia. Some theorize that Serbian nationalists might have perceived her actions as antagonistic. This theory gained credence when it was noted that Belgrade television station, a target of NATO bombing, shared similarities with the BBC's mission. Here's where it gets really interesting. Just 15 days before Jill's murder, Serbian journalist Slavko Kuruvia, who had criticized Slobodan Milosevic, was murdered in Belgrade in a remarkably similar manner. The timing was hardly coincidental. In 2009, the BBC reported that an anonymous individual, claiming responsibility for Jill's murder, had also threatened Tony Hall, the head of BBC News at the time. Michael Mansfield, who would later defend Barry George, proposed this Serbian theory during the trial, bringing forth an official report indicating that a Serbian warlord had placed BBC Director General Sir John Birt on a threat list. The theory suggested that due to tightened security around Sir John Birt, Jill Dando might have been targeted instead. The personal angle can't be ignored either. Before her engagement to Alan Farthing, Jill had been in romantic relationships that occasionally overlapped. She cited her demanding professional life as a reason for ending these relationships, which could have led to feelings of resentment. The news of her engagement perhaps provoked intense emotional responses in someone she had previously been involved with. Alice Beers, a BBC colleague and former Watchdog presenter, later revealed that both she and Jill had received threatening letters shortly before the murder. These letters contained threats of kidnapping and rape, yet remarkably, Beers was never contacted by police about them. As she put it, "If no stone was left unturned, then I would have been called." On May 25, 2000, over a year after the murder, police finally made an arrest. Barry George, a 40-year-old recluse living near Jill's home, was taken into custody. The media immediately labeled him a local weirdo, and suddenly the investigation had its villain. But who was Barry George really? Born on the challenging White City housing estate in West London, he was the product of a broken home. A restless child who was often isolated, George invented fantastical lives for himself, lives where he was both significant and glamorous. He had an intense fixation on Queen's frontman Freddie Mercury, even adopting the alias Barry Bulsara after Mercury's real surname. George's background was certainly troubled. He was unemployed with a history of stalking women and convictions for sexual assault, including attempted rape. His intellectual quotient was just 75, placing him in the lowest echelons of the population, and he was later diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. In his community, George was known as a loner and oddball. His proclivity for obsessive conduct was evident through his fascination with celebrities. He used various famous names, Steve Majors, borrowing from Lee Majors' role in The $6 Million Man and that Barry Bulsara identity. George often spun fanciful tales about his experiences, claiming to have been a roadie for Michael Jackson and to have served with the British Army's elite SAS. Here's what's particularly disturbing. George first came to police attention when he contacted them shortly after Dando's death to report observing suspicious truck activity near her residence. Rather than being seen as a helpful witness, this contact somehow marked him as suspicious in investigators' minds. Those who knew George described someone preoccupied with fitness, often seen running or cycling around the neighborhood. His bizarre attempt at fabricating a connection with Freddie Mercury, asserting he was Mercury's cousin and pestering Queen fan club members, painted him as eccentric rather than dangerous. His previous arrest in 1983 at Kensington Palace for carrying suspicious items further colored public perception. But was this enough to make him a murderer? The case against George was precariously thin from the start. It relied heavily on a minute particle of firearm residue discovered in the pocket of his coat, evidence that would later be thoroughly discredited. Additional evidence consisted mainly of gossip about his purported behavior of lingering in the area and allegations of him following women. When Barry George's case went to trial in 2001, it became clear that the prosecution was building their case on shaky foundations. The evidence against him was almost entirely circumstantial, yet the pressure to convict someone for this high-profile murder seemed to override concerns about the quality of that evidence. The prosecution, led by Orlando Pownall, presented what they claimed was a series of damning evidence. George's interest in guns, a supposed obsession with Dando, eyewitness accounts placing him at the scene, and crucially, that speck of gunpowder residue found in his jacket pocket. But let's examine this evidence more closely. When police searched George's apartment, they discovered 54 newspaper clippings about Jill Dando dating back to 1990. The prosecution painted this as evidence of obsession. However, George's defense, led by the formidable Michael Mansfield QC, argued that these articles were part of a much broader collection of celebrity-related content. Dando represented only 8% of the 670 newspaper clippings found in George's possession. Crucially, no personal photos, videos, or autographs of Dando were found in George's residence. items you'd expect to find if George had been genuinely obsessed with her. The supposed shrine to Jill Dando simply didn't exist. The eyewitness testimony was equally problematic. Susan Mays claimed she could place George in the vicinity of Gowan Avenue around 7 a.m., hours before the murder. Despite claiming to have scrutinized the man for 6 seconds, her descriptions were wildly inconsistent. Initially, she described smart, short-cut hair, but later changed this to longer, untidy hair. Allegations arose that police had attempted to influence her statement. The most damaging evidence was supposed to be that particle of gunpowder residue. Robin Keeley, representing the prosecution, asserted it was improbable that the evidence had attached itself to George's jacket after its seizure, confidently linking it to firearms discharge. However, the defense raised serious questions about crime scene contamination, particularly when witnesses claimed to have seen armed police officers entering George's apartment with visible weapons, something the police denied. Perhaps most significantly, George had an alibi that the prosecution struggled to overcome. Susan Bicknell, a witness at the Hafad Center, placed George there at 11:50 a.m., just 20 minutes after the murder and several miles away. At that time, she described George as appearing calm and unflustered, hardly the demeanor you'd expect from someone who had just committed murder. The trial judge made the controversial decision to allow publication of prejudicial photographs of George at the trial's start, including one depicting him dressed in SAS-style gear, crouched as if ready to shoot while wearing a gas mask. This image seemed designed to portray him in the most unfavorable light possible. Just 5 days after the trial began, the jury delivered its verdict, guilty of murder by a 10-to-1 majority. After one juror had to withdraw during proceedings, the judge permitted a majority decision requiring at least 10 jurors to agree. Barry George was sentenced to life imprisonment, but this was far from the end of the story. Almost immediately after the conviction, public skepticism began to grow. Credible voices started questioning the trial's outcome, and these doubts quickly became headline news. The concerns centered on several factors: the intense pressure to obtain a conviction, the substantial financial resources allocated to the investigation, and those prejudicial photographs released at the trial's start. Prominent newspapers, including the London Evening Standard, Telegraph, and Daily Mail, all expressed serious concerns about the conviction's security. Radio 4 callers debated the case extensively. Trevor McDonald scrutinized it on ITN's Tonight program, and Channel 4's Cutting Edge produced a compelling episode titled "Did Barry George Kill Jill Dando?" that reconstructed the murder scene to reinvestigate the evidence. The growing protest movement attributed their concerns to fundamental failures in the justice system. How could someone be convicted of murder when the evidence was so thin? The case highlighted the uncomfortable reality that intense public pressure and substantial financial investment in an investigation could potentially compromise the pursuit of actual justice. Barry George, resolute in maintaining his innocence, declared, "I did not murder Jill Dando, and I believe that one day the truth will come out. I only hope and pray that this happens in my lifetime. I have spent over 2 years in prison for a crime I simply did not commit. I have struggled hard during this prosecution against me to keep my faith in the British criminal justice system. Today, that faith and belief has been destroyed." George was sent to Whitmore Prison in Cambridgeshire, a maximum security facility, where he became prisoner FFF 5227. Even his elderly mother Margaret had to undergo searches before being permitted to visit him. Interestingly, George encountered less hostility from fellow inmates than might be expected. Many appeared increasingly persuaded of his innocence. In a 2004 letter, notorious lifer Dennis Nilsson explained that this wasn't merely honor amongst thieves, but a belief that nobody inside believes. He is guilty. This was a professional hit. Even hardened criminals could see what the justice system had missed. Despite the conviction, Barry George never stopped fighting to prove his innocence. His initial appeal in 2002 was rejected when Lord Chief Justice Lord Wolfe stated, "I have no doubt about the accuracy of George's conviction." But George's persistence would eventually pay off. The breakthrough came when forensic experts working with the Criminal Cases Review Commission reevaluated that crucial particle found on George's jacket, the supposed firearm residue that had been central to his conviction. Their conclusion was devastating to the prosecution's case. There was no greater likelihood that this particle came from a gun fired by George than from any other source. This revelation led to a retrial, during which the judge dismissed the once pivotal firearm evidence that had underpinned George's original conviction. Think about that for a moment. The most important piece of evidence against George had been completely discredited. On August 1st, 2008, after 7 long years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, Barry George was acquitted of Jill Dando's murder. 7 years of his life gone. 7 years during which the real killer remained free. The aftermath of George's acquittal brought intense media criticism of the police investigation. Legal expert Michael Mansfield expressed grave concern about how police had concentrated solely on George while ignoring other possibilities. The murder, he argued, had all the characteristics of a professional hit, something the original investigation had seemingly ignored in their rush to secure a conviction. In a cruel twist of irony, detectives had even enlisted an undercover policewoman to try to elicit a confession from George, but this operation yielded nothing. George, exhibiting signs of mental distress during his imprisonment, had remained convinced he would never be released and might become a target for assassination within prison. The psychological toll of being wrongfully convicted for such a high-profile murder cannot be understated. Now in his mid-40s when released, George had lost his prime years to a justice system that had failed him spectacularly. The real killer of Jill Dando remained free, and the case remained unsolved. The Jill Dando case revealed uncomfortable truths about celebrity, justice, and media influence in British society. The investigation commanded unprecedented resources, more public funding and police personnel than virtually any similar case, but this raises troubling questions about equality in justice. As noted in our research, the murder of a young black girl in a drive-by shooting garnered far less investigative attention and press coverage, despite being equally violent. No substantial reward was offered for information about that case, while £250,000 was posted for Dando's killer. This disparity highlights how celebrity status can distort the allocation of justice resources. The substantial reward in Dando's case may have actually compromised the investigation's integrity. When such large sums are offered, the reliability of witness testimony becomes questionable. People may convince themselves they saw things they didn't, or worse, deliberately fabricate evidence. Pretrial media coverage reflected society's need to see someone punished for this crime. Murder touches our lives indirectly every day through news reports, but it seldom feels personal except when television brings it into our living rooms. Jill Dando wasn't just a murder victim. She was someone millions of people felt they knew personally. This emotional connection, while understandable, may have contributed to a rush to judgment. The police felt immense pressure to solve the case. The media demanded answers, and the public wanted closure. In this perfect storm of expectations, Barry George became a convenient scapegoat, a local oddball whose strange behavior and troubled past made him an easy target. The case also highlighted the dangers of confirmation bias in police investigations. Once George became a suspect, investigators seemed to interpret every piece of evidence through the lens of his guilt rather than following the evidence wherever it led. This tunnel vision meant that other potential suspects, including those with far more credible motives, were never properly investigated. More than 2 decades after Jill Dando's murder, we're left with more questions than answers. Who killed Britain's sweetheart, and why? The professional nature of the assassination suggests someone with military or intelligence training, yet no such individual was ever seriously investigated. The Serbian connection remains tantalizing but unproven. The timing of Slavko Kuruvia's murder, just 15 days before Jill's death, the similar execution-style killing, and the threat list mentioning BBC executives all point toward a possible political motive. Yet without concrete evidence, this remains speculation. Could it have been revenge by organized crime figures angered by Jill's work on Crime Watch? The show had indeed led to numerous convictions, and criminal organizations have long memories. But again, police failed to pursue this angle with sufficient vigor. The obsessive fan theory cannot be entirely dismissed, despite Barry George's acquittal. Someone with genuine obsessive tendencies might have been capable of planning and executing such a crime, but they would likely have been far more sophisticated than George ever appeared to be. What about those threatening letters that Alice Beers mentioned? The fact that police never even contacted her about threats made against both her and Jill suggests a level of investigative incompetence that goes beyond simple oversight. The truth is, we may never know who killed Jill Dando. The investigation was so fundamentally flawed from the beginning that crucial evidence may have been lost forever. Witnesses' memories have faded, potential suspects have died or disappeared, and the trail has gone cold. But perhaps the most important lesson from this case isn't about who killed Jill Dando. It's about the dangers of allowing public pressure and media attention to distort the pursuit of justice. Barry George spent 7 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit because the system failed. How many other Barry George are sitting in prison cells today, victims of investigations more concerned with securing convictions than finding truth? The Jill Dando case remains one of Britain's most notorious unsolved murders: celebrity, mystery, wrongful conviction, and unanswered questions. It's also a cautionary tale about justice under the glare of the media, pressure to solve, rewards that distort, and confirmation bias that can blind investigations. Jill deserved better. Barry George deserved better. The real killer is still free, and her family still waits for closure. Curious about the overlooked evidence and the mistakes that shaped the verdict? The full episode digs into witness contradictions, forensic puzzles, a reconstructed timeline, and the moments investigators rushed to judgment. The details, the headlines skipped. Download the Scoob app now to get access to the full story and exclusive bonus material. Subscribe for more deep dives. Stay curious, stay skeptical.